Hey, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for joining this new edition of What's Your Story? And I'm actually very honored and incredibly excited to have this guest on, Catherine Sipher. I've known her for a few years now, and let me tell you guys, she is a powerhouse. She's authentic. She's brave. She's a mother of six. God bless her soul. And she's basically a serial entrepreneur. So, without further ado, Catherine, you want to introduce yourself to my community?
Sure, thanks. Hi. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm honored and thrilled to be a part of what you are doing here. So, my name is Catherine Sipher. I am a remote piano teacher and soon to be published poet.
Crazy. Okay, so piano, I know you because you taught me piano, and everything she taught me, guys, I still remember. But talk to me about soon to be published poet. How'd that come about?
Yeah, so I'm so excited that you asked me about that because this is like a passion project that's just about to be launched, and I'm super excited about that. So I think I'll jump back into a little bit about my story to kind of give it some context. But the fall of 2019, my life basically the way that try to describe it is that there was like this big chasm in my life that was just kind of hidden, and like I knew it was there, but didn't really have words to articulate, and I wouldn't even let myself see it. But an event happened that allowed that chasm to really be exposed. And then that sent me on this um, really dark period where I was really re-exploring who I was, how I had become who I was, what I believed, what relationships were good for me, which ones were not serving me. And it was a really, really dark time. And the result of that, separately, but not completely separately, I ended up my marriage of 19 years dissolved, and I ended up walking away from the evangelical Christian faith. And all of that was happening through the fall of 2019, through the height of COVID, the beginning of COVID. And
Nothing like
so,
getting smacked with everything right away. And before you share your story, as everybody knows, I like to dig in and ask questions. So, for the listening audience who may not be clear, what do you mean by there was a chasm? Like, can you elaborate a little bit more on what that felt or how you experienced that?
yeah, it's hard to describe in some ways because I think now that I've got a little more language around some of what was my previous life, I think I was really disassociated from my body. I didn't really know how to read my emotions and what my body was telling me. And even if I did, I was in more of a high control faith and worldview that told me that almost everything that I was doing was wrong, and I wasn't allowed to feel those things. And there were certain expectations of how I was supposed to live and behave. And if I wasn't doing that, again, there was something wrong with me. And there was also this idea of you kind of have to accept where you are and everything. So it was a very suppressed, not maybe not suppressed, but confined way of living, like really strict borders of what life could hold and couldn't hold. And so I knew that I was not happy, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. Like that was just suffering that I had to bear and like endure.
Yeah.
But I was so wrapped up in this one particular worldview that it wouldn't really allow me to truly see how I was. Um, if
That's
that
super
makes sense.
helpful. And I love that you were able to describe that the way you did, because I know, being an addiction and mental health recovery coach, and some people who are watching this, they struggle immensely with that disassociating and not really being able to tap into their emotions. So I really appreciate you elaborating on that. And then I guess my follow-up question to that before we get into the poetry is, so you don't have to go into the event that happened that caused you to start to question it, but I imagine that was really scary and difficult for you to then give yourself even permission to start to examine your patterns of beliefs and behaviors. So I totally get that. But what kept you moving through that to give yourself permission to at least to look at and experience or re-examine what felt right for you?
I think it was a mixture of a couple of things. I think sometimes when we get, and it seems to happen at midlife. So, I mean, that whole concept of like midlife crisis, I don't know that I agree with that phrase, right? But I think there's something about just reaching, I was 39 at the time, that I think our bodies just can't take the dissonance anymore. There's just something about it that just says, I can't live this way. Like I can make it work and pretend that it works. But I didn't, there's some, I'm trying to put words to this. I feel like sometimes we don't, one, I had my kids, so I had to keep moving forward. I had to figure it out. And two, like I felt like in some ways I had no choice. I mean, I had a choice. I could have stayed in that worldview. I could have stayed there, but it clearly was not working for me in any shape or form. And so the only other option was to ask the questions and then begin to explore what the alternatives could be and really take an honest look at, again, who I was, what I believed, what was wrong with me. And turns out there actually wasn't anything wrong with me. It turns out I'm just human, and learning how to live and embrace my humanity is what I needed to do. And that was what I had not been doing before. And then the journey was really about learning how to actually hear my voice and learning that I actually had thoughts and feelings and emotions. Like I've always been a very emotional, I've been accused of being overly sensitive and like having like, I feel my feelings big, but I thought there was something wrong with me, but I still think that I wasn't really getting to the crux of what was going on. I wasn't really still truly hearing my voice. I was feeling all the feelings, but then trying to suppress everything to make it fit what I thought I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
So at first, I didn't even know what I was thinking. I had to literally start writing things down, my thoughts down, so I could actually even articulate them and hear my voice. And so then it became every spare moment I had, I was frantically writing stuff down. And at first, it was a lot of negative limiting beliefs and it was a lot of dark ideas on repeat. But that was what I needed to do to get it out, to see it. And then slowly, tiny little glimmers of hope and little seeds of the life that I now live were kind of planted through this journal sporadically. And that's where the poetry came from. It was out of a desperation to try to hear my thoughts, figure out my life, try to understand where I fit in with things. And it was through that journaling, somewhere in between there, like there were little pieces of lines of poetry started to pop out. And I didn't even recognize them at first. And then gradually more and more came out. And, as I was on this exploration of who I am, who I'm becoming, I'd find little writing prompts just to kind of prompt my journaling sometimes if I got stuck or I didn't want to stay in the negative loop of writing, and then again, poetry kept popping out. And so I thought, well, maybe there's something here. And then, fast forward, long story, I ended up getting a writing coach and then sharing some of my poems with her. And she's like, you've got something here, Catherine. And I was like, well, I actually have like 60 or so of these. And she's like, well, throw them in a document. Let's see what you got. And throwing them in a document, it really showed there was a full progression of basically a memoir of the inner workings of a woman going through massive life transformation, a woman trying to find her voice, to be able to hear it, to be able to articulate it, and then truly also learning how to become the hero of her own story. So I think part two of your other question was, why did you not give up? Why did you keep going forward? And I think I finally realized there was a therapist that was working in my home with me and my children. And he said to me, Catherine, you matter. And I didn't believe him. I was like, no, I've got a nursing baby. I've got 6 kids. I'm homeschooling these kids. Like no, I do not matter. I am here just to serve them. And so I matter in that way, but the rest of me, no, I don't matter. Like inherently, I didn't think I mattered. But I've come to realize that when we think about heroes, I think initially about like superheroes, or we think about like community helpers, you know, like firemen and policemen and those kinds of things. And what I realized that they all have in common is that they want to go save somebody, right? But they've decided that that person is worth saving. They matter enough to be saved. So for me to become really the hero of my own story and to move forward through this dark time, I had to believe that I mattered enough to be able to step into that role of being the hero of my own life and taking agency for all aspects of my life. And that was a way that I had not been living. I had been living a very disempowered life where other people or other things were supposed to save me. And since they didn't think I mattered, like I wasn't really being
Yeah.
saved.
And moreover, the reality is there's nobody who can save us but ourselves, right? And something that I'll touch upon is you had that realization when that therapist said to you that you mattered, and it was that opportunity to then decide, well, okay, it may not feel true to me today, right? But what can I do to make that statement feel true to me
Mm.
at some point? And I think that's so important for the community to hear, because we're always given seeds. We have planted seeds or like insight from external sources that can move the needle and move us in a direction that is going to help us grow and heal. But we also have to give ourselves permission to be brave and follow those little, signs or whatever it is. And so that's one thing. The other thing I want to highlight for the community, and I think is so powerful, that you said, and now I lost it, so it's going to take me a minute and it will come back. But okay, so until it does, what is so you've shared with the community that you didn't think you mattered, that you had this idea of what you needed to look like, act like, be like, as this person in this faith organization and as a wife. What did you have to work through to get to the place where you are now publishing a book of poetry? Because they're such contrasting ideologies of a self.
What did I not have to work through?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the better question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had to work through everything. I had to work through where I came from, the culture that I grew up in, the communities that I grew up in, the communities that I fully embraced in my 20s and 30s, and how that impacted my relationship with myself and with other people. I mean, it drastically changed everything about who I am. And I mean, I had to figure out, and I'm still working on this. I still had to figure out, like, what's my favorite drink? Like,
Yeah.
what's my favorite color? What's my favorite, what do I like to do in spare time? Like, what kind of movies do I like watching? Like, I didn't have any sense of self. It was a couple of years into the process, and I was sitting at a little tea house, and um, I had this just beautiful moment where I was drinking this amazing peppermint tea, and oh my gosh, I'm going to cry. And I could taste it, and I was like, that is the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. And it's maybe the only time still that I've like really, really like tasted my food or my drink. And I was like, oh, this is what it means to live. And I keep trying to tap into that with various things and try to be awake and aware. But like, that's how disconnected that I was, that like I couldn't even tell you what my favorite color was.
Yeah. And it's because more people than not, right? If we know that if our like conditions, patterns, belief systems are embedded from in utero to 7 or 8, a lot of people, I mean, many, many more than would even admit to, are just going along to get along. And so they really don't have a sense of self. And to your point, it is an ongoing journey because we're constantly learning and growing as well. Even I, who have been doing this work since I was 14, am constantly, experiencing and figuring out what feels good, what doesn't. but being brave enough to be like, oh, that does not serve me anymore. And that feels good for me. So, how have you cultivated that courage to be able to not only get curious about the things that might feel good for you or might not, but also have the ability to be like, nah, nope, this isn't good for me. I'm walking away, or, oh, I like this. I'm gonna lean into a little bit more peppermint tea.
I think again, it comes down to believing that I matter. Like,
Yeah.
I think that we have been created with these sensations in our body that are meant to be enjoyed. Like, why are we here just to say, like, I, I'm cold, but like I can't fix that, you know, like to realize that I'm cold. Like this was a massive thing for me too. Like I even realized that I was cold most of the time and I just kind of suffered. And then a friend was like, you're cold. Let's get you in the sun instead of out of the shade. And again, that was an epiphany. Like I can do that. I can recognize that I'm not comfortable in my body and I can solve the problem and move it. Or another small thing is like listening to songs on the radio. Like it never occurred to me till I was like 40, 41 that if I don't like the song that's playing on the radio, I can press the button and I can switch. Like that is like, it's so small and it sounds really extreme, but it really was where I was. It was kind of more like, well, this is what's on. I have to kind of just accept what's here. No, I don't like the song. I can feel that. I can make that change. So it's a couple of steps, right? It's really believing that I matter enough to be able to make those kinds of empowered choices and then tapping into my body to know what is resonating with me and what's not. And then going into to take that action to make that change. Because when you take that action to make that change, you are saying, yeah, I matter enough to not want to listen to this thing on the radio right now. And it's small, but it's still some of those action steps that I'm learning how to take.
Yeah, it's not small. It's huge. In fact, I was just having my show with Drew Mack yesterday, and we were talking about that very idea of calibrating your radio or frequency, which in our conversation had to do with thoughts. It's no different than saying, oh my gosh, this song stinks, I don't want it, right? And so I love that that's where you really kind of stepped into, because when you understand that you have that much power, if you're thinking a thought that says, I'm crappy and I'm not a worthy person, and you're like, well, that feels crappy in my body, I'm just going to go, oh, I think I'm pretty amazing. Might have did something silly, but it's cool. I'm with it, right? Then you experience more joy. And of course, me being also very knowledgeable in energy and quantum physics, why wouldn't we want to have that skill? So it's a beautiful that you're learning that in things that you like, because those seemingly small but are absolutely profound and significant are the things that are going to continue to help you develop that skill, so you're constantly sitting in joy, which is what I'm incredibly passionate about. I do want to circle back to the thought that escaped me, because it's important for the community to hear and also to validate and affirm you, is that you experienced this pivotal moment where you were like, oh my God, like I am in the void and I need to do something. The reality is a lot of people have those experiences, but they don't do anything. And what I need the community to understand, whether you believe in science or if you're spiritual, I straddle both lines. I'm very spiritual and I'm also a nerd about science, to support people much like Catherine, who have gone through religious trauma, which is very pervasive. The universe is going to continue to give you experiences to rattle you, because it's going to rattle you awake. And so for people who are like, I just can't catch a break, every 6 months something's coming up, and if you look at your life and you see that you're living a life that is unfulfilling, or you're in suffering, or you feel like you're in this chasm, like Catherine said, it's because the universe is trying to nudge you and say, look, at the road forward is scary. It's unknown. It's uncharted territory. However, you must take it for you to free yourself from this chasm, this suffering. So thank you so much for sharing that. And be so proud of yourself, because really you would have just faced more and more experiences of deeper, greater suffering, because that's just how we experience growth, you know? So going forward, you have this amazing, book of poetry that's going to be published. Carrie wants a signed copy. I've already told her several times. Um, what is your hope? What do you hope to leave your reading audience with once they get that book in their hands? And what's the impact you're hoping you're able to make with that book?
I love that question. I hope that people that read this poetry collection feel less alone in their own transformation. Um, I wrote it for women that might be on that edge, that might know that like something's off, but they don't know quite what it is, and they maybe haven't taken that step yet. I wrote it for women that are in the middle of it and it still feels really murky and like you're in the fog and you can't see more than 2 inches in front of your nose, if even that. And I wrote it for people that have maybe already been through it all so that they can again feel less alone in what they've been through. We all go through suffering, and I think most of us at some point go through some kind of transformation like this at some point, and it feels so isolating. And mine just happened to happen at the same time that I left a community and COVID hit at the
Yeah.
same time. So it was extra isolating for me, but in many ways that was like the most beautiful gift, because then I only had myself. And
Yeah.
that turns out that's what I needed the whole time. And if some of those other things had still been in place, I don't know that I would have fully come back to myself like I needed. But that's my hope with this collection, is that it resonates with people and helps them feel less alone in their journeys, wherever they might happen to be on the journey. And the collection is set up in 3 different sections, so you can read it straight front to back and kind of get the whole story as like a memoir-ish kind of style. Again, it's not like the details of my life, but you definitely see the rising and the strength of my voice. And then, not that I've arrived at the end, but like, the most empowered version of myself at that date, when the cutoff date was. But it's written in 3 different sections. So there's like the weakest, like quietest, like whisperings of my heart, just like, okay, what's going on here? I think something's happening. And then there's like kind of that in between where you're kind of like still wrestling like back and forth, and then most empowered. So you can just pull poems out of different sections for whatever might resonate with you at where you are in your life journey at that time as well.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I love that because, I mean, I have this show specifically because I am a firm, like, believer that our story is our superpower. And when we transmute whatever experiences we have, and we know the emotional attachment to what we went through, it's our responsibility to then pick up the next person who's gone through suffering and can, you know, really use us as that person that says, okay, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. And also I would encourage the audience, whoever's excited about this book of poetry, which I am, because I've had the privilege of reading Catherine's poems. So I strongly encourage you guys to get this book. But I would also say that, if you or something and it triggers you, give yourself permission to shut it and get curious why. Right? Because it's an opportunity to do what Catherine and myself have done, is learn yourself. Even if it's, ooh, that felt icky and I don't like it, so I'm gonna put it down. That reaction is a gift, right? That's a planting of a seed. And so I really would encourage people to get the book, but also give yourself permission to experience the book however it comes up for you, and not judge it, and come from a place of curiosity. Which leads me to my next question for you, Catherine, because to become a very empowered person, I would imagine, and I hate to put words in your mouth, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you must be a pretty curious person, because you've had to reinvent who you are and how you view all aspects of your world.
Yeah, I would say so. I think I've always been curious. I've always liked to learn. And I think that I've got a history of that reflected through my life in the various stages of my life. It was just where I was pointing that energy and curiosity and that desire to learn. Yeah, and this has been leaving, entering singlehood has meant learning a whole slew of skills that I never had, never would have gained, like never even had the access to have the agency for. So I think that, it's like those first little steps, then you build that confidence. So like, okay, I've made that phone call to the insurance company. Okay, I made it through that. Okay, now let's figure out how to do the next thing. And so now it's not so much like, oh my gosh, I can't do whatever, but now it's like, okay, I'm going to sell this book. How do I collect sales tax? How do I get to the government? So now it's not a like, oh, I could never do that. It's more of a like, well, okay, I can do that. I just have to figure out how. I clearly remember years and years ago, it was in my former life, I was going for a run and I saw a building that was kind of dilapidated, but like sitting there empty in the middle of town. And I had the thought, oh, that'd be really cool to have like a piano studio and like a shop front. But then my first next thought was like, no, Catherine, you can never figure that out. Like you're not
Mm.
XYZ enough to be able to do that. That's no longer currently my dream because I'm building my business online and I love the business that I'm building here with all the other ways that I'm growing it. But now the question is not, when I have these dreams and ideas, the instinct is not to tell myself I'm incapable or that won't happen. Now the instinct is like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. How do I make this happen now? And I have to realize, whew, take a deep breath. Like not everything can happen right now. I'm a solopreneur. I'm a mom of six. Like there's no way I can do all the creative ideas I have now. But sometimes I get stuck. My nervous system is now like, oh, sprint, sprint, sprint. You had all these years where you weren't doing these things. And I have to remind myself, no, and I've run a marathon, but like it's a life is a marathon. And I hate that. Like it's so cliche, but really like I've got to accept that the dreams that I have and aspirations I have now will come to fruition at the time they're meant to happen. And it's important for
So
me to still
good.
figure out how to manage my own nervous system in the middle of it while I'm growing it. Which is still, one of the journeys that I'm on is still trying to figure out how to like press pause on the work and the ideas because they will remain. I'm not losing myself. I'm not letting go of this anymore. And so it's okay if say I go to bed and I get an extra hour of sleep. Because again, I'm not abandoning myself again.
Yeah, I love that so much. And something I want to highlight for the community, which is so, and I teach it all the time, guys, with my clients and my community, having tough conversations. You built confidence by taking one small step after another. Instead of saying, oh, okay, I'm going to attack the entire insurance company over advocating for my children's health, you said, okay, I'm going to figure out the number to call the provider. And then I'm going to give myself a break, hopefully, knowing you, that was probably practice. And then I'm going to call the provider and right. And so you didn't go from 0 to 100. And I think that's such an important part of your story that the audience hears, because knowing what I know about the subconscious and how it's inevitably going to self-sabotage us. It will if we jump too fast. If you have never ran a day in your life and then decide to run a marathon, it is the rare person that can follow through on that without busting through a whole bunch of obstacles. And so I love that you shared that with the audience. And I imagine that's something you still have to practice. You mentioned it now with your ideas, but even parenting 6 children.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's all about, or I've been learning, and you probably taught me that, yeah, it's about taking those little, sometimes they're like micro steps, right? Like you don't even realize you're doing them sometimes, but it's building that confidence. Like my website now is more complicated. I'm like in there and doing all the back end stuff. And when I first threw it up, a friend was like, just make it stupid simple. Just like, and so I did. And it's learning too, when you need to hire out help, when you need to get support, when you need to do it on your own, when it makes sense to ask for help, when it makes sense to do it on your own. And every little tiny bit, again, grows that confidence. So like, how do I, like, I'm honestly terrified of sharing this collection of poetry. Like I think it's great. I think it's beautiful. I think it can make a difference, but it's also very vulnerable and raw. And one day I was flipping through it recently as we were just making sure all the page numbers were in the right place. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm really going to share this. And I like, I had to like pause, like,
Yeah.
it's okay, right? But like, I never would have gotten to that place if I hadn't ever even been willing to recognize, oh my gosh, you wrote a piece of poetry. And like, why don't you share it with one person and see what one person, how it resonates with one person? And why don't you try two? And then why don't you try your writing group? And then, so I think you're right. It's definitely those little small actions, because there's no way I could have gone from who I was to who I am now, without those small steps and building confidence each step of the way, and then believing more in myself. Like, yes, I was able to do that, so of course I can do this. And I mean, another question I think goes along with this topic is like, well, why me? Like, who do I think I am? I'm just a average suburban white woman with a whole bunch of kids. Like, I don't have some traumatic story. I don't have some like massive, fancy degrees. But I think that's the whole point of being able to share and do what I do, is that I am just like you. I am just like everybody else, and I don't think we have to have accolades or a massive story. Like, everybody's story and everybody's journey and everybody's experiences and what they have to offer this world is just as valid as anybody else's.
You reminded me of something. I had a beautiful interview with my amazing friend. He turned into a great friend after I interviewed Jorge Sierra. And he and I agree, you know, trauma is trauma is trauma is trauma. I have such a hard time when I hear people say, well, you only went through a divorce when you were a little kid. You didn't experience blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. If it impacted your ability to see the world from a place of optimism, if you experienced an emotional distress, if it impacted your nervous system, that's trauma. And it doesn't matter what it looks and feels like. And when we can truly come from that lens, we understand that we all have shared experience of suffering. And it's putting aside what that suffering needs to look like and really get to, well, what did you do to move through that? And what steps did you take so that you were no longer going to be negatively impacted and conditioned by your experience, and then grow and expand into the person you're meant to be. So, so important that you said that. And secondly, who are we not? One of my favorite quotes that I had on my wall in my former house for years was, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is powerful beyond measure. We ask ourselves, who am I to be X, Y, and Z? But the truth is, who are you not to be? And I believe fundamentally that we are meant to be the fullest, truest, authentic expression of ourselves, because when we allow that to shine, we give others permission to do the same, which is super powerful, because a lot of empowered people can make a lot of amazing changes in a world that desperately needs it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Yeah. And that's not how I would have believed. I would have thought I had to have a resume of whatever it happened to be at the time to be able to do what I do now. And I don't believe that. I have a passion, I have energy, I have love for life. I have me, my authentic self, and everything that I bring, as a piano teacher, as a writer, as a poet. And I bring that to the world and I say, this is me. This is enough. It's not that I'm not trying to grow, but like, take it, and the people that will resonate with it will resonate with it.
So beautiful. So, what would you like to leave the list? If there is one, I don't know, piece of wisdom, or, something that you have taken with you through this journey into becoming, and we're all continuously becoming, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Trust yourself. Learn to trust yourself. Learn to get to know who you are, and listen to what your voice is telling you, because it's powerful and it's not wrong. It's not wrong.
Ooh, so good. And I'm going to add to that, guys, find somebody who is going to tell you that what your heart is telling you is not wrong. Because oftentimes, much like Catherine, she shared with you guys, we're in a community that is conditioned like us. And so they're not the people you can lean into. But find support, whether it's through an organization, whether it's through therapist, whether it's through coach, whether it's through anybody, because you do need affirming to be able to be brave to step into becoming who you're meant to be, which is love, which is joy, which is fun, which is anything you want to be in any given moment. So, Catherine, I got nothing. You know, I love you to pieces. I am so incredibly honored and privileged that you took time to do this interview and share with the listening audience. I am so honored to call you a friend. Truly, truly. And thank you so much for your time. Until next time, guys, this is Carrie, and I will see you for another episode of What's Your Story?